They tried to sell the virgin girl at the train station, but the loner rancher said, "Not while I'm here." The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty platform of Copper Creek Station when Jacob Hendricks first laid eyes on the girl. She couldn't have been more than 19, with auburn hair that caught the desert light like burnished copper and eyes the color of sage after rain. But it wasn't her beauty that made Jacob's weathered hands tighten around his coffee cup. It was the fear in those green eyes and the way she shrank back when the fat man in the expensive suit grabbed her arm. Jacob had ridden into town that morning for supplies, his packhorse loaded with pelts from the winter's trapping. He'd planned to catch the noon train to Silver Falls, sell his furs and return to his cabin in the mountains before the spring thaw made the trails treacherous. 20 years of solitary living had taught him to mind his own business, to keep his head down and his gun clean. But something about the scene unfolding on the platform made his jaw clench with righteous anger. "Now, gentlemen," the fat man was saying to a small crowd of rough-looking miners, "this here's a prime specimen, fresh from back east, untouched by frontier life. She'll make some lucky man a fine wife, and I guarantee her purity." The way he lingered over that last word made Jacob's stomach turn. The girl-woman, Jacob corrected himself, noting the mature set of her shoulders, despite her youth, kept her chin raised even as tears tracked down her dust-stained cheeks. Her dress, once fine blue silk, was torn at the sleeve and dirty from travel. Around her wrists, Jacob could see the raw marks left by rope. "What am I bid for this lovely flower?" the fat man continued, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of a livestock auctioneer. "Remember, boys, opportunities like this don't come along often in these parts." A bearded miner stepped forward, coins jingling in his calloused hands. "I'll give you $50 for her, Mortensen." 50? 50? The fat man, Mortensen, laughed like a hyena. "Friend, this girl's worth 10 times that to the right buyer. Look at that skin, pale as fresh cream. Those hands ain't never seen a day's hard work." Jacob set down his coffee and studied the situation more carefully. 3 men flanked Mortensen, hired guns by the look of them, with low-slung holsters and cold eyes that swept the platform for trouble. A few townspeople had gathered to watch the spectacle, but their faces showed only the morbid curiosity of folks watching a snake oil show. None of them seemed inclined to intervene. The girl's gaze swept desperately across the crowd, searching for a friendly face, for anyone who might help her. When her eyes met Jacob's, he saw a flash of hope quickly suppressed by experience. How many times had she looked for help only to find more predators? $75, called another miner, this one missing half his teeth. "Now we're talking sense," Mortensen grinned, his gold tooth glinting. "But I'm thinking this merchandise is worth at least." "She ain't merchandise." The words cut through the morning air like a blade, and Jacob was surprised to realize they'd come from his own mouth. The entire crowd turned to look at him, this tall, lean stranger in worn buckskins and a hat that had seen better days. Jacob stepped forward, his spurs chiming softly against the wooden platform. Mortensen's eyes narrowed as he took in Jacob's appearance, the way he moved with predatory grace, the Colt .45 riding easy on his hip, the steel in his gray eyes that spoke of a man who'd faced down his share of trouble. "I beg your pardon, friend," Mortensen's voice carried a warning. "This here's a private transaction. Nothing private about it when you're conducting it in public," Jacob replied, his voice calm as still water. "And like I said, she ain't merchandise. She's a person who's legally in my custody," Mortensen snapped, pulling a folded paper from his vest pocket. "Got the papers right here, signed by her father. Sold her to me fair and square to cover his gambling debts." Jacob's eyes flicked to the girl, saw her flinch at the mention of her father. So that was how they'd gotten their hooks into her. He'd seen it before, desperate men selling their daughters to pay off creditors, usually to brothels in the big cities. But this was different. This was slavery, plain and simple, dressed up in legal papers. "Papers can be forged," Jacob said mildly. "Why don't we let the lady speak for herself? Miss, you got anything to say about this arrangement?" The girl's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried clearly in the desert air. "Please, I don't want this. He's going to sell me to a brothel in San Francisco. He told me himself." Mortensen backhanded her so fast Jacob barely saw the movement. The girl staggered, blood trickling from her split lip. "Shut your mouth, girl. Nobody asked you to speak." That's when Jacob's patience ran out. He moved like lightning, covering the distance between them in 3 quick strides. His left hand shot out and grabbed Mortenson's wrist before the fat man could strike again, squeezing until the bones creaked. With his right hand he drew his Colt in one smooth motion, the barrel coming to rest against Mortenson's temple. "Touch her again and I'll paint this platform with your brains," Jacob said conversationally. "Now why don't you tell your boys to keep their hands where I can see them?" The 3 gunmen had started to reach for their weapons, but they froze when they saw the professional way Jacob handled his iron. This wasn't some drunk cowpoke looking for trouble, this was a man who knew his business. "Easy, boys," Mortenson wheezed, his face turning purple from Jacob's grip. "No need for unpleasantness." "Oh, I think there's plenty of need," Jacob replied. "See, where I come from, we don't take kindly to men who sell women like cattle. Call it a character flaw." "You're making a mistake, stranger," one of the gunmen said, his hand hovering near his pistol. "Mr. Mortenson's got friends in high places, you don't want this kind of trouble." Jacob's smile was winter cold. "Son, I've been looking for trouble for 20 years and ain't found none yet that could stick. Your boss here wants to test that theory, he's welcome to try." The station master, a nervous little man in a green visor, came hurrying over with a sheriff's deputy in tow. The deputy was young, maybe 25, with soft hands and a badge that still gleamed with newness. "What's all this commotion?" the deputy demanded, trying to sound authoritative. "This man's interfering with a legal business transaction," Mortenson gasped. "I demand you arrest him for assault." Jacob released the fat man's wrist but kept his gun trained on him. "Deputy, this man's trying to sell a woman into prostitution. Last I checked, that was illegal, even out here." The deputy looked uncertain, his eyes flicking between Jacob's steady gaze and Mortenson's expensive clothes. "Well, now if he's got legal papers don't make slavery legal," Jacob said flatly. "And if you're the kind of lawman who thinks they do, then maybe you need to find yourself a different line of work." The girl stepped forward, her voice stronger now. "Please sir, my name is Margaret Ashford. My father lost everything gambling. This man came to our home in Louis with those papers, said my father had signed me over to him, but I never agreed to any of it. He's been holding me prisoner for 3 weeks, bringing me west to sell me to those awful places." The deputy looked even more uncomfortable. "Miss, if your father signed legal documents, you ever see a bill of sale for a human being that was legal?" Jacob interrupted. "Because I ain't, not since we fought a war over it some years back." A murmur ran through the growing crowd. Some of the townspeople were nodding in agreement now, their faces showing disgust as they began to understand what was really happening. A woman in a blue bonnet stepped forward. "Sheriff Hutchins would never stand for this," she declared loudly. "Where is gone to the county seat for the week," the deputy admitted. "Won't be back till Friday." Jacob saw Mortenson exchange a meaningful look with his men. They'd planned this, he realized, waited until the real law was out of town before conducting their business. The deputy was either bought or too green to know better. "Tell you what," Jacob said, holstering his gun with deliberate slowness. "Why don't we all take a step back and think about this? Miss Ashford, you got anywhere to go? Family or friends who might take you in?" Margaret shook her head, despair creeping back into her eyes. "My father was all I had. When he sold me, I thought I'd rather die than—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Well then, here's what we're gonna do," Jacob announced. "Miss Ashford, you can come with me. I got a cabin up in the mountains, safe and quiet. You can stay there until we figure out how to get you back to civilization proper." Mortenson sputtered. "You can't just steal my property." Jacob's hand drifted back to his gun butt. "Your property? I thought we established she ain't property. But if you want to keep pushing that point, I'm happy to discuss it further." "This ain't over, stranger," one of the gunmen growled. "Mr. Mortenson's got influence. You can't just ride off with her." "Watch me," Jacob replied. "Miss Ashford, you willing to come with me? I give you my word as a gentleman that you'll be safe and free to leave whenever you choose." Margaret looked into his weather-beaten face, searching for deception and finding only honest concern. You'd really help me. You don't even know me." "I know enough," Jacob said simply. "I know you don't deserve what these vultures got planned for you, and I know it ain't right to stand by and watch when you got the power to help." The woman in the blue bonnet stepped forward again. "I'll vouch for this man," she announced. "Jacob Hendricks has been trading in this town for 5 years now. He's rough around the edges, but he's honest. More honest than some I could name." She shot a pointed look at the deputy. You know him, Mrs. Patterson?" the deputy asked. "Course I do. He helped my boy when he got lost in the mountains last winter, searched for 3 days in a blizzard, and brought him home safe. Never asked for a dime in payment." Jacob felt heat creep up his neck at the praise. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, and he sure wasn't used to being called a hero. He was just doing what needed doing. Mortenson's face was getting redder by the minute. "This is outrageous. I have legal papers. I have You got the right to leave town before I lose my temper," Jacob said mildly. "And you got about 5 minutes to exercise that right before I start exercising some rights of my own." The crowd was fully on Jacob's side now. Someone called out, "Get them slave traders out of here." Another voice added, "Shame on you, trying to sell a woman like livestock." The deputy looked around nervously, realizing which way the wind was blowing. "Now, Mr. Mortenson, maybe you should consider—" "Don't tell me what to consider, you fool," Mortenson snapped. "I want this man arrested for theft and assault." "What theft would that be?" Jacob asked. "I ain't taken nothing that belonged to you." "And what assault?" "You mean when I stopped you from hitting a defenseless woman? Because where I come from, we got a word for men who hit women, and it ain't gentlemen." One of Mortenson's gunmen, a lean man with a scar running down his left cheek, stepped closer. "You're a hard man to like, stranger. Maybe we should continue this conversation somewhere more private." Jacob studied the man's stance, the way his hand hovered near his gun. Professional but not top tier, dangerous enough to civilians, but Jacob had faced down Apaches and Mexican bandits. This candy ass didn't worry him much. "I'm happy to accommodate you," Jacob said calmly. "But are you sure you want to dance? Because I should mention, I ain't never lost a dance yet." The scarred man's eyes narrowed. "Big talk for a mountain man." "It ain't talk," Mrs. Patterson called out. "That man killed 3 rustlers single-handed when they tried to steal cattle from the Morrison Ranch." Sheriff Hutchins said it was the finest shooting he'd ever seen. The gunman's confidence wavered slightly. He glanced at his partners, looking for support, but they were studying Jacob with newfound respect. The mountain man's reputation was starting to precede him. "Look," Jacob said, his voice taking on a reasonable tone, "nobody needs to die today. Miss Ashford comes with me, and you boys ride out of town. Everybody lives to see another sunset. Seems like a fair trade to me." "And if we don't agree?" Mortenson demanded. Jacob's smile was colder than a mountain winter. "Then I guess we'll find out how good your boys really are with those guns. But I should warn you, I've been shooting since I was 10 years old, and I ain't missed what I was aiming at in 20 years. The train whistle sounded in the distance, and Jacob realized he'd have to make a decision soon. The eastbound train would be pulling in any minute, and if Mortenson got Margaret on that train, she'd disappear forever into the hell he'd planned for her. "Miss Ashford," he said without taking his eyes off the gunman, "you need to choose now. Come with me, or take your chances with these gentlemen, but choose quick." Margaret didn't hesitate. She stepped to Jacob's side, her chin raised defiantly. "I choose freedom," she said clearly. "Miss Hendricks, I accept your offer of protection." Mortenson's face went purple with rage. "You little whore, after everything I've invested in you." Jacob moved faster than a striking snake. His fist connected with Mortenson's jaw with a sound like an axe hitting wood. The fat man went down hard, his head bouncing off the platform planks. "I warned you about your language around the lady," Jacob said mildly, shaking out his knuckles. The 3 gunmen tensed, hands moving toward their weapons. The crowd scattered, women shrieking and men diving for cover. Only Mrs. Patterson stood her ground, clutching her reticule like a weapon. "Easy, boys," Jacob said, his right hand resting casually on his gun butt. "Your boss just learned some manners the hard way. Don't mean you have to follow his example." The scarred gunman's nerve broke first. "This ain't worth dying for," he muttered, and began backing away. His companions followed, keeping their hands carefully visible. The deputy finally found his backbone. "You men are disturbing the peace," he announced. "I'm ordering you to leave town immediately." Mortenson struggled to his feet, blood trickling from his mouth. "This ain't over," he snarled at Jacob. "You got no idea who you're messing with." "If you're half as important as you think you are," Jacob replied, "then I reckon you won't have any trouble finding yourself another line of work. Might I suggest something more honest? Maybe pig farming. You got the temperament for it." The eastbound train was pulling into the station now, black smoke billowing from its stack. Jacob took Margaret's arm gently. "Come on, miss. Time we were going." "Where?" she asked. My spread's about 3 hours ride north, nothing fancy but it's safe and clean, you can rest up, decide what you want to do next. As they walked toward Jacob's horses, Margaret looked back at the platform where Mortensen was ranting at his men. What if he follows? Jacob helped her mount his spare horse, a gentle mare he'd bought for packwork. Then he'll learn why folks around here call these mountains the boneyard. Lot of men have tried to follow me home over the years, most of them decided they had better things to do. They rode out of town at an easy pace, Jacob's packhorse trailing behind them loaded with supplies. Margaret sat her mount well despite her ordeal, and Jacob found himself revising his opinion of Eastern girls. Maybe they weren't all helpless flowers after all. Miss Hendricks, Margaret said after they'd ridden in silence for an hour, why did you help me? You don't know anything about me. Jacob considered the question as they climbed into the foothills. The desert was giving way to pine and aspen, and the air was getting cooler as they gained elevation. I reckon there's times when a man's got to stand up and be counted, he said finally. Times when right and wrong ain't complicated, just clear. What Mortensen was doing to you was wrong, simple as that. But you could have been killed, those men had guns. Jacob's laugh was dry as desert wind. Miss, I've been dodging bullets since before you were born. Those city boys didn't worry me much. Still, Margaret persisted, you risked your life for a stranger. That's not something many men would do. Maybe Jacob allowed, or maybe most men just never get the chance to find out what they're made of. They made camp that evening beside a clear mountain stream, with the peaks rising around them like cathedral spires. Jacob built a small fire and cooked beans and bacon while Margaret washed in the stream. When she returned, her hair was clean and braided, and some of the haunted look had left her eyes. Tell me about yourself, Mr. Hendricks, she said as they ate. Mrs. Patterson made you sound like some kind of frontier legend. Jacob was uncomfortable with the attention. Not much to tell. Been living up here about 20 years ever since I mustered out of the army. I trap and hunt, sell furs and meat in town when I need supplies. Mostly I just try to mind my own business. 20 years alone in the mountains, didn't you ever want more? Jacob poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the star-filled sky. I tried the civilized life once, had a ranch down in Texas, was fixing to get married to a preacher's daughter, then the war came, and when I got back, he shrugged. Sometimes things just don't work out the way you plan. Margaret heard the pain in his voice and didn't press. Instead she asked, what will happen to me now? I can't go back to St. Louis, even if my father's still alive. He's probably drunk himself to death by now, and I have no money, no skills except playing piano and speaking French. Well, Jacob said thoughtfully, Mrs. Patterson mentioned she's been looking for someone to help with her children since her husband died, and the schoolmarm job's been open since Miss Jenkins got married and moved to Denver. Might be you could find a place in Copper Creek, if you've a mind to stay. Margaret stared into the fire, considering. A teacher, I never thought about that, but yes, I think I'd like that very much. They slept on opposite sides of the fire, Jacob wrapping himself in his bedroll while Margaret used his spare blanket. She woke once in the night to find him sitting up, his rifle across his knees, listening to the darkness. When she stirred, he glanced over at her. Go back to sleep, he said quietly, just checking on things. Are we in danger? Probably not, but probably ain't the same as certainly, and I like to be careful. In the morning, they broke camp early and continued toward Jacob's cabin. The trail wound through stands of tall pines and across meadows carpeted with wild flowers. Margaret found herself relaxing for the first time in weeks, the peace of the mountains working its magic on her frayed nerve. It's beautiful here, she said as they crested a ridge and looked down into a hidden valley. I can see why you choose to live in such a place. It's honest country, Jacob replied, hard but fair. You work with it instead of against it, and it'll provide for you. Try to fight it and it'll kill you quick. His cabin sat at the far end of the valley, a solid log structure with a stone chimney and a small barn. Smoke was rising from the chimney, and Jacob frowned. That's odd, he muttered, his hand moving to his rifle. I banked that fire before I left. Should have been cold by now. As they drew closer, a figure emerged from the cabin. It was an old Indian, his gray hair braided with feathers and beads. He raised one hand in greeting, and Jacob relaxed. Gray Wolf, he called out in relief. What brings you down from the high country? The old man walked toward them with the dignity of a king. I came to warn you, my friend. Men with guns have been asking questions about you in the trading posts. they seek the white woman you took from the iron horse. Jacob dismounted and helped Margaret down. How many? 6 that I saw, maybe more. They have much money and speak of revenge. Grey Wolf's eyes studied Margaret with frank curiosity. This is the woman they seek. This is Miss Margaret Ashford, Jacob said formally. Margaret, this is Grey Wolf of the Ute people. He's been a friend to me for many years. Margaret nodded respectfully. I'm pleased to meet you, sir. Grey Wolf smiled, revealing teeth white as fresh snow. The white woman has manners. This is good. But Jacob, these men who hunt you, they are professional fighters, not the soft city men you faced at the Iron Horse. Jacob's jaw tightened. Mortensen must have wired ahead, hired himself some real talent. What does this mean? Margaret asked, fear creeping back into her voice. It means, Jacob said grimly, that your friend Mortensen ain't willing to let you go. He's hired professional gunfighters to track us down. But why? Surely I'm not worth that much to him. Grey Wolf answered before Jacob could speak. It is not about money now, young woman. It is about faith. The fat man was shamed before many people. In his world, this is a thing that cannot be allowed to stand. Jacob nodded agreement. He's got to come after us now or he'll look weak to every other criminal from here to California. Can't have folks thinking they can stand up to him and get away with it. Margaret sank onto a log bench beside the cabin door. This is all my fault. I've put you both in terrible danger. No, Jacob said firmly. You didn't choose to be in that position. You didn't ask to be sold like livestock, and you sure didn't force me to interfere. I made that choice all by myself. But what can we do? If these men are professionals, then we'll deal with them like we deal with any other predator. Jacob said calmly. We'll make them understand that this valley ain't healthy for their kind. Grey Wolf nodded approvingly. The young bear has wisdom, but 6 men with guns is not a small thing, even for you, my friend. Maybe not, Jacob admitted, but I got advantages they don't. I know this country like the back of my hand, and I got friends. He looked meaningfully at the old Indian. My young warriors are eager for excitement, Grey Wolf mused. It has been a peaceful summer, perhaps too peaceful for young men with hot blood. I can't ask you to fight my battles, Jacob protested. You do not ask. I offer. These men bring poison to clean country. It is good to remove poison before it spreads. That evening, as they planned their defense, Margaret surprised them both by asking to learn to shoot. Jacob was hesitant at first, but she insisted. I won't be helpless again, she said firmly. I won't cower and wait for men to decide my fate. If I'm going to live in this country, I need to know how to defend myself. Jacob started her with his backup pistol, a smaller caliber weapon that wouldn't knock her down with its recoil. She proved to be a natural shot, her hand steady and her eye true. By the end of an hour's practice, she was hitting tin cans at 20 yards with remarkable consistency. You've done this before, Jacob observed. Margaret smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. My father taught me when I was young, before he changed. He said a lady should know how to defend her honor. Smart man. When he was sober, Jacob said, keep practice. With any luck you won't need it, but better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. Margaret finished. Yes, he used to say that too. They came at dawn 3 days later, 6 hard-faced men with professional weapons and cold eyes. Jacob spotted them from his lookout post on the ridge above the cabin. They weren't trying to hide, just riding straight up the valley like they owned it. Margaret was safely hidden in a cave. Grey Wolf had shown them, armed with Jacob's backup gun and strict instructions to stay put no matter what happened. The old Indian and 3 of his warriors were positioned in the rocks above the trail, while Jacob waited in the cabin. The leader of the group was a tall man with silver hair and a face like carved granite. He rode right up to the cabin door and called out, Hendricks, you in there? Name's Cole Morrison. I represent certain business interests that want to have a word with you. Jacob stepped onto his porch, his rifle cradled casually in his arms. Mr. Morrison, I take it you're here about Miss Ashford. Smart man. My employer's prepared to be generous. He'll pay you $500 for the woman, no questions asked. That's more money than a mountain man sees in 5 years. Generous offer, Jacob allowed. But the lady ain't for sale. Matter of fact, she ain't even here anymore. Morrison's smile was cold as winter steel. Now that's disappointing, because we tracked you straight here and we ain't seen nobody leave. So either she's here or she's buried somewhere in these hills. Either way we aim to find out which. You're welcome to look around, Jacob said mildly. Course I should mention that these mountains can be dangerous for folks who don't know them. Easy to get lost, easy to have accidents. Is that a threat, Hendricks?
Just a friendly warning, lots of unfriendly critters in these parts, bears, mountain lions, rattlesnakes. Oh, and you can't forget the Utes. Morrison's hand moved toward his gun. You trying to scare us with Indian stories? That's when Grey Wolf's war cry echoed off the valley walls, high and wild and full of ancient fury. Morrison's horse shied, and two of his men reached for their weapon. Easy boys, Jacob said, his rifle still held casually. That's just my neighbor saying howdy. He's got real good manners for a savage. An arrow sprouted from the ground between Morrison's horse's feet, vibrating like an angry snake. Then another, and another, forming a neat circle around the group of gunmen. Jesus Christ, one of the hired guns yelped. How many of them are there? Hard to say, Jacob replied, conversationally. Utes are real quiet when they want to be. Could be 3, could be You boys feeling lucky? Morrison was too professional to panic, but Jacob could see the wheels turning in his head. He'd come prepared for a gunfight with one man, not a war with unknown numbers of Indians in their home territory. This ain't over, Hendricks, Morrison said finally. My employer ain't the forgiving type. Neither am I, Jacob replied. You boys want some advice? Ride out of these mountains and keep riding. Tell your boss that Miss Ashford is under my protection, and that protection extends to keeping her past buried where it belongs. She's starting a new life, and anybody who tries to interfere with that is going to answer to me. Big talk for one man. Who said anything about one man? Grey Wolf materialized from the rocks like a ghost, his rifle trained on Morrison's chest. His 3 warriors appeared simultaneously from different positions, their weapons covering the other gunmen. The white bear speaks truth, Grey Wolf said in his precise English. The woman is under our protection now. She is sister to our friend, which makes her family to the Ute people. You understand family, white man? Morrison understood. All right. His face had gone pale under his tan. Fighting one man was business. Fighting an entire tribe was suicide. You're making a mistake, all of you, he said, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. There's more money in this than you can imagine. Money don't mean much to dead men, Jacob observed, and that's what you'll be if you don't clear out of my valley in the next 5 minutes. The gunmen wheeled their horses and rode out, but Jacob knew it wasn't over. Men like Morrison didn't give up easy, and their employer had too much invested to quit now, but he'd bought them time and maybe that would be enough. Margaret emerged from her hiding place an hour later, her face pale but determined. Are they gone?
For now, Jacob said. But they'll be back, probably with more men. Then I should leave, Margaret said quietly. I should go somewhere far away where I can't bring trouble to good people. Where? Jacob asked. How far you think you'd have to run before men like Mortensen couldn't find you? These ain't local bullies, Margaret. They got reach and money and connections. Grey Wolf nodded agreement. The young woman speaks from fear, not wisdom. Running only makes the hunter's job easier. Then what do we do? Margaret asked. Jacob was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the mountains that had been his refuge for 20 years. Finally, he spoke. We make a stand. Right here, on ground of our choosing. We show these vultures that some things ain't for sale at any price. But you could be killed. Jacob smiled, and for the first time in years it reached his eyes. Miss, I've been half dead for 20 years just going through the motions of living. Maybe it's time I remembered what I was fighting for. That night, as they sat around the fire planning their defense, Margaret asked the question that had been haunting her. Why, Jacob? Why risk everything for someone you barely know? Jacob stared into the flames, remembering another woman, another time, another choice he'd failed to make when it mattered. Because, he said finally, sometimes a man gets a chance to do something right, and if he don't take it, he spends the rest of his life wondering what kind of man he really is. The next morning brought news from town. Sheriff Hutchins had returned early and was asking questions about the incident at the train station. More importantly, word was spreading about Mortensen's business. The territorial governor had gotten wind of the situation and was sending marshals to investigate. But Jacob knew that wouldn't stop Morris. Professional killers didn't worry much about territorial marshals, especially when they were being paid enough to disappear afterward. The attack came at sunset when the light was tricky and shadows long. Morrison had brought reinforcements. Jacob counted at least 10 men moving through the trees below the cabin. They were good, he had to admit, professional and careful, but they didn't know the country and they didn't know Jacob Hendricks. The battle lasted less than an hour. When the smoke cleared, 3 of the gunmen were dead and the rest were in full retreat, including Morrison himself with a bullet graze across his forehead. Jacob found Margaret in the cabin, still clutching her pistol, tears streaming down her face. "It's over," he said gently, taking the gun from her trembling hands. "They won't be back." "You're hurt," she whispered, seeing the blood on his sleeve. "Just a scratch. Nothing Grey Wolf can't patch up." "Jacob," she said, looking into his weathered face, "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't need thanking," he replied. "Just need you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you'll make something good of this life you got back. Teach those children in town, make them understand that the world's got good people in it, not just predators." Margaret smiled through her tears. "I promise. But Jacob, what about you? Will you come visit sometimes? Check on your investment?" Jacob felt something stir in his chest, something that had been cold and dead for 20 years. Mountain gets mighty lonely in winter. Might be nice to have a reason to come to town once in a while. 6 months later, the former Margaret Ashford, now Miss Margaret Hendricks, stood in front of her one-room schoolhouse, teaching a class of frontier children about geography and mathematics, and the importance of standing up for what's right. And every Friday evening, like clockwork, a tall man in worn buckskins would ride down from the mountains to have dinner with the schoolmarm, his eyes no longer cold, his heart no longer empty. Because sometimes when a man finds something worth fighting for, he discovers he's also found something worth living for. The mountains kept their secrets, the town prospered, and in the spring there was talk of a wedding between the schoolmarm and the mountain man who'd saved her from a fate worse than death. But that, as they say, is another story.